Welcome to the State of the Nation. I'm your host, Mike Sham, and we finally get one of our wishes, and that is to speak to a member of the economic freedom fighters. But that person has a very, very long history in politics. One could call him the ultimate political survivor, very well known. Welcome to the State of the Nation, Mr. Carl Niehaus. Carl, welcome to the State of the Nation. Good to have you in the seat.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks for having taken the initiative to bring me here.
Yeah,
because you bumped into me at Proud Mary restaurant where I was having my breakfast, and you said I should come to the show. And I'm very happy to be here, and thanks, and also my greetings to your audience.
Well, I owe you breakfast because I did disturb you. So, but good to have you here. So, Carl, let's start off. You've obviously you're a man that lived the struggle. Right. To people that don't know, let's just go through some of the, I wouldn't call them highlights, they're almost lowlights. I mean, we shouldn't make fun of this, but you were seriously incarcerated. You were in jail. The National Party had a particular problem with you. Right.
Mike, let me be short because it's a long life.
Yeah.
I've been in politics now for 45 years. I started questioning apartheid when I was a very young man. I was still at school. I was 16 years old. At university, I went to the Rand Afrikaans University. I was expelled from the Rand Afrikaans University because I called for an integrated education system. I called for the release of President Nelson Mandela from where he was then on Robben Island. I put up posters to that effect. And the powers that be at the university, at Rand Afrikaans University, didn't take kindly to that. So they expelled me. I then ended up working as a young man in an upholstery factory in Alexandra. Became involved with Dr. Beyers Naudé. I'm sure many of your viewers will know who Dr. Naudé was. He was a clergyman, someone who really fought against apartheid when he saw the light. He was a member of the Afrikaner Broederbond and the Dutch Reformed Church and made a full turn away from that and fought apartheid. And he became like my mentor and my father. So in 1979, at the age of 19, I then joined the African National Congress. I went to Botswana, I joined the ANC, and I also joined the armed wing of the ANC. And the next number of years, from 79 to 1983, I worked inside the country in the underground of the ANC and of Umkhonto we Sizwe. My main base was Alexandra. I know Alexandra Township very well. The political leaders there I know very well, people like Paul Mashatile, Orbit Bapela, and others, who today are still major players on the national scene. In mid-1983, I was arrested by the South African Security Police. It turned out that the ANC cell that I was working in the underground had been infiltrated by a member of the South African Security Police, and they had quite a substantial amount of information about my activities. So I was eventually, but perhaps I should just pause there. During the time that I was detained and held in solitary confinement, that was one of those low times in my life because I was severely tortured. As we started the show, I said to you, if I can't sometimes hear you, I may just have to ask because I use hearing aids. That was because of that torture. I had both my eardrums perforated, and today I'm a hearing impaired person, and I have to use very strong hearing aids in order to be able to hear. But okay, end 1983, I was then arraigned in front of the court in the Johannesburg South High Court with a charge of high treason for the activities that I carried out on behalf of the ANC, which also included bombings, bringing weapons into the country, and a number of other things. And I was sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment, found guilty of high treason. In fact, The judge, Judge Myburg, threatened to hang me, to give me the death sentence, but finally decided to give me a 15-year sentence. So the next 9.5 years of my life I spent in the Pretoria maximum security prison. During the time that I was there, I tried to improve myself. I tried to educate myself. My education, as I've said, because I've been expelled from the Rand Afrikaans University, and even when I went to Wits, just before I managed to get my final exam for my degree, I was then arrested by the police and sentenced. So I did 3 degrees at UNISA through correspondence study while I was in prison. And finally, in 1991, I was released.
You had the distinction of being the last person released, am I correct?
One of the very last. And the reason for that was because Kobie Coetzee and the Afrikaner establishment had a particular bee in their bonnet about me. And part of the reason why I've, over the years, had such a very close relationship with President Jacob Zuma is that when President Zuma came in as the leader of the ANC's advance team, you will know that there was a kind of pre-negotiation phase before the full negotiation started. He made it his duty to get all the ANC political prisoners released. And he encountered this problem that Kobie Coetzee actually told him to his face, "I've got no intention to release that traitor," referring to me. So President Zuma, at that stage, made it his task to come and visit me in prison. He would come almost every second weekend. Make sure that I'm well, come and tell me about how he was trying to get me out of prison, what effort he was making. He also continued to contact my very conservative Afrikaner parents every time after he visited me, and told them how I am and what he was trying to do. Now, my dad was a very conservative man, a member of the Conservative Party. He was not exactly waiting for a call from Jacob Zuma. But President Zuma was not allowing himself to be derailed by that kind of negative attitude. So I've got a huge gratefulness for the loyalty that he showed to me, the persistence with which he worked to get me out of prison. And finally, when I got out of prison, I'm the kind of guy that I'm very loyal. I'm very clear about my political commitments. When I came out of prison that same afternoon, people still talk about it. They said, "We heard that Comrade Carl got out of prison early in the morning, but that afternoon at 3 o'clock, I was at the then ANC head office in Johannesburg, saying, 'I'm here to work.'" It ended up that I went to the ANC's Department of Information and Publicity. They asked me, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I think I can write well. I would like to write. I would like to present the policies of the ANC." And quite quickly, within months that I went to the Department of Information and Publicity, I was made the head of the ANC's Media Liaison Unit. And at a very, very early age, I became the national spokesperson of the ANC and also the spokesperson of President Mandela. And I'm still hugely grateful to the African National Congress of then, and also to President Mandela for having had the trust in me and having given me such huge responsibilities. So that was an amazing time of my life. I managed to travel with President Mandela throughout the world, many very important meetings that he had with world leaders. I still have in my house a photo of myself and him and Yasser Arafat during the first meeting when he met with Yasser Arafat. Through President Mandela, I managed to meet Fidel Castro. Through President Mandela, I had the opportunity to travel to Oslo when he received the Nobel Peace Prize and to be present there, and the great honor that I was given to write his acceptance speech for the Nobel Peace Prize. So one of the photos of great pride that I have that is hanging above my workspace, in my workspace, is a photo of me and President Mandela, him holding the certificate and also the medal that he received when he got the Nobel Peace Prize. So these are some of my experiences. Then I went to Parliament in 1994. I was elected. I was also a member of the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress. And in 1997, end of 1997, President Mandela asked me to become South Africa's ambassador in the Netherlands. The first ambassador of the Democratic South Africa in the Netherlands was Dr. Zach de Beer, but he developed serious health problems. And President Mandela felt that there were a number of very critical issues in the Netherlands that had to be addressed to it, and therefore he wanted someone like myself to go there. Because in the Netherlands, it's not just about the bilateral relations between the Netherlands and South Africa, but there are also a number of multilateral United Nations related organizations there. Among them, as we know now, because recently there was the big matter of South Africa bringing the case against Israel in the International Court of Justice, I also ended up for 5 years being South Africa's permanent representative at the ICJ. During the time that I was ambassador, the International Criminal Court was also established through the Rome Statutes. And again, it was established in The Hague in the Netherlands. And I was centrally involved in also South Africa's entry into the International Criminal Court, although I personally wasn't in favor of South Africa entering, but I was executing the policy of my country at the time to do so. I also served for 2 years as the chairperson of the Organization for the Prohibition on Chemical Weapons, which is an incredibly important instrument created by members of the United Nations. It is not a direct UN organization, but it is a related organization dealing with the issue of the banning of chemical weapons throughout the world and the problem of those countries who have had or still have chemical weapons and the storage facilities for that. I remember that I traveled several times to Siberia to go and investigate what was happening with chemical weapons that the old Soviet Union had, and when the Soviet Union broke up and the Russian Federation came about, there was at one stage, I believe that problem is now resolved, was a problem that those chemical weapons were not properly stored, and it started to leak into the groundwater and affecting the environment. So those are the kind of international work that I did.
Now, if we can just pause at this point, because quite clearly at that stage you were well entrenched and a very senior member of the ruling party, the ANC, which at that point was doing particularly well both in South Africa and abroad, but you ended up having personal issues.
That's true. I came back to South Africa and I ended up with some problems in terms of my personal finances, in terms of loans, and a problem also with a house that I couldn't pay off. Now, those were problems that many people have. But when you're a politician, and especially when you start making enemies, they come and they are getting used against you. I don't think my financial problems were more severe than many other people's. There are many people who have problems sometimes with paying down loans and have to make arrangements. But at the time when I came back to South Africa, I also started asking questions about what was going on inside the ANC. And I started becoming very critical of some of the policy positions, especially neoliberal economic policy programs, that the ANC was advancing. So at that early stage, and this was now in the mid 200s up to 2010, I also had very powerful enemies within the ANC. And that financial problem was then weaponized. At the time, I was for a short while back with the ANC, again as its national spokesperson. Some of these issues were taken to the media, leaked to the media, hyped, blown up, way beyond what really its nature were. And the kind of person I am, I said, look, I'm a national spokesperson of an organization. The spokesperson must never be the story. The spokesperson must tell the story. So I went to see Gwede Mantashe. I still recall that meeting very well. And I said to him, look, I'm going to resign. And he screamed at me. He said, you went on a radio show with John Robbie and you said you're sorry that these personal finances of yours have impacted on you. Why do you apologize? There's no need to apologize. I said, well, I've apologized because it shouldn't have happened. I'm going to resign from my position as national spokesperson. I'm going to fix these problems, and then I will come back. And that's exactly what I did. So in the next couple of years, I sorted out those financial problems. I came back, but I came back continuing my criticism of what I believe to be wrong in the ANC. And part of that process of then re-establishing my prominence and my position in the ANC was that I was elected onto the National Executive Committee of Umkhonto weSizwe Military Veterans Association, which of course I was perfectly entitled to, having been an MK veteran for so many years. And I also became the national spokesperson of MKMVA. I found amongst the MK veterans a very fertile ground for these criticisms that I was expressing against the policy direction that the ANC had taken. So it gave me a platform where I could strongly and loudly declare a commitment to a different economic policy program, one for radical economic transformation. And I did articulate it very strongly. I also articulated my own views that I believed that President Jacob Zuma had been given a very raw deal, and that President Zuma, in the situation where he found himself with the legal charges against him on the so-called arms deal, was really the victim of a political manipulation of the law. And I maintained that. I went to every single court case that President Zuma had, every appearance for the past 23 years, and gave him my support. And I've always maintained that his problems are not first and foremost of a legal nature. I've always maintained that his problems are first and foremost politically manipulated because of enemies that he have in the ANC, and because of the economic policy program that he has advanced that didn't fit the neoliberal economic policy program that so many others, who I call sellouts, have pursued in the ANC.
Okay, so you quite clearly, we've gone through the details. One of the things that comes out is a very close bond between yourself and President Jacob Zuma. And you say that he was the victim, and that makes two of you, right? Because he always is quite clearly, that's one of his strongest defenses, is that they're kind of picking on him. What did you make of his presidency?
Look, it was a mixed bag. President Zuma's presidency had the intention, also because of the support that he had from COSATU and South African Communist Party, which at that stage were in reaction to GEAR and to the policy program that had been introduced by Thabo Mbeki.
What was the problem with GEAR? South Africa was growing at 6%, unemployment was dropping. the country was doing very well. What was the problem within those particular bodies with GEAR? I've never quite understood what the problem was. Do you think it's just a fear of success?
No. It was the fear of creating an increasingly unequal society. It was the problem of the effect that GEAR had on the vast majority of poor in South Africa, on the rights of the workers in the trade union movements, and the fact that you talk about economic growth. You also talk about economic growth that benefited a very small sliver of an elite and a privileged people in South Africa, while the majority were not benefiting by what was happening.
The numbers would contradict what you're saying.
Well, give me an example.
Quite simply, South Africa was creating jobs, right? Our unemployment rate was going down quite dramatically.
But
so yes, some people were getting richer because the country was growing, and some people had put themselves in a position to benefit from that. Obviously, if one looking at equality as everybody being equally poor, our policies that we've got at the moment are probably quite effective, one would imagine.
Well, at the moment, you see a continuation of neoliberal economic policies. And Cyril Ramaphosa is the prime example of a neoliberal policy program instead of working for a transformation of the economy that will empower the majority of South Africans. Thabo Mbeki introduced GEAR without addressing the fundamental inequalities in the South African society. One of my biggest bugbears with Thabo Mbeki is that he had a 2/3 majority. He was the president in this democratic dispensation of ours that had the largest majority. He did nothing with it to address some of the serious problems around land restitution. He did nothing with it in terms of addressing the inequalities that are here in our society. And that is one of the biggest failures that the Mbeki administration has to own up to.
Okay.
I still maintain that on the issue of unemployment, you need to go and look at what COSATU and the South African Communist Party said, what was happening to workers, what was happening with regards to also labor brokers, and that many of those jobs that you refer to that register as jobs being created were not sustainable jobs giving people a proper life and a proper income.
Okay.
I have listened to people talking in the small economy, in the middle class level, about what happened during the years of President Zuma. And many of them in the small and medium-sized businesses, especially from the black community and especially women, will tell you that during the Zuma administration, they had far more opportunities than ever before. You also have to acknowledge that during the Zuma administration, we saw the largest infrastructural economic development program and the creation of infrastructure in South Africa that we saw in the last 30 years. Yes, President Zuma was right from the beginning of his administration faced with serious attacks on him. He was curtailed in what he was able to do. He probably didn't move fast enough on the issue of the implementation of a radical economic transformation program. That only picked up towards the end of the second term of his administration. But that he was committed to try and bring a fundamental transformation and to help with the empowerment of especially black and African people is a truth that we cannot deny. Now, I'm upset about the way in which there were those in the Ramaphosa administration who refer to the 9 years of President Zuma's administration as wasted years. That's utter poppycock. Again, the facts show us that that was not the case. And what happened during the Zuma administration is a damn sight better than what has happened since Cyril Ramaphosa took over.
And Carl, the allegations and subsequent commission around state capture, what do you believe around that?
I think the State Capture Commission under Justice Zondo was a political instrument. I don't believe that state capture can be pulled out of the way in South Africa.
Was there state capture?
State capture has always happened in South Africa, and it is not something that happened suddenly under the Guptas. State capture had been part of the history of our new colonial country, including also the capture by big companies such as Anglo-American, De Beers, the Ruperts at a later stage as they grew stronger and stronger. Now, why do we need to concentrate on the issue of state capture as if it is something that only happened since 2009? And why do we want to concentrate on the Gupta family, who never managed to have any influence in the South African economy beyond about 2% of this economy? The Guptas, compared to Anglo-American, to Remgro, to all these other big companies, Bidvest, etc., was a spaza shop.
Yes. I fully agree with you that South Africa, the economy has always been dominated, influenced by the difference being that in the latter years, in the Zuma years, there was the purposeful breaking down of institutions in order to facilitate those particular companies growing, that particular business enterprise prevailing. And we've had admissions by people, like McKinsey, like KPMG.
I'll be very careful to put my evidence on McKinsey with its checkered history and with KPMG with its checkered history.
Sure.
And I think we have to be careful about the deliberate breaking down of institutions to make a blanket allegation of that. Because during the same time that President Zuma was there, you saw an improvement in the performance of Eskom under Brian Molefe, Marcelo Koko, but they were removed by this administration and what happened subsequently. If you want to talk about the breaking down of institutions in South Africa, the prime example is what happened under the Ramaphosa administration. We have seen all our state-owned enterprises being run into the ground. South African Airways has been destroyed. And it is destroyed by the Ramaphosa administration finally, and by the interaction that there had been with Pravin Gordhan and this consortium to which South African Airways now finally had been pawned off for 51 rands. You have the collapse of Eskom under one poor CEO after the other. And you have a deliberate mismanagement of Eskom in order to bring in these so-called renewables and green energy programs, which nowhere in the world have shown themselves to be able to be sustainable to maintain a sophisticated electricity grid. It is not possible in Germany. It is not possible in other Western European nations. In fact, all of them have taken a decision to start a process of reopening coal electricity stations. But in South Africa, we are pushing in the opposite direction. We want to privatize Eskom. We break it up. We break up the distribution network of Eskom along the lines of what Goldman Sachs suggested under under Kingston. And all of this is there with one intention, and that is to destroy our state-owned enterprises and the way in which it can help to uplift the majority of Black and especially African people. You know, Mike, I come from a working-class Afrikaans family. My dad was a fitter interner in the railways. So working-class railway people. And I know what the South African Railways role was in the upliftment of the lower middle class and poor Afrikaner. And the National Party government and the Broederbond were very effective in doing so and using state-owned enterprises in order to achieve that. ISCO the same, Van der Byl Park, everything that was done there. But we've lost the ability of these state-owned enterprises to now do the same for a much broader sector of our South African population.
I suppose the difference being that those SOEs managed to still fulfill their mandate back in those days compared to now.
Yes, that is an important question that you ask me. And the question that we should ask ourselves is, why are these state-owned enterprises not able to fulfill their mandate? Surely it is partially because of mismanagement. It is partially also because of a deliberate government policy infused by private sector interests to break up these enterprises so as to open new markets for the private sector. That is what is happening with Eskom. That is what has happened with SAA. That is what now apparently is the intention also with the failing management of Transnet. Right. All of this is with the intention to go for an unbridled privatization program, and that unbridled privatization program cannot be implemented without the deliberate destruction and mismanagement of SOEs. And that is the main reason why you see the SOEs, as you said, not fulfilling their mandates.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to agree with what you're saying there, is that there is no doubt that these entities are being destroyed willfully. The question is whether that destruction wasn't begun under the Zuma administration, because those performances were terrible. You mentioned Eskom keeping the lights on, which they did under Brian Molefe Machela-Koko, but the performance was in steep decline. There was, if one looks at the fiasco, the debacle around Medupi and Kusile, for example, right? The over budget of King Shaka Airport, for example, right? What I'm saying is this degradation of the SOEs to the point where I agree with you, it's fire sale, get rid of them and they're going to be privatized, not because whether we like it or not, because they cannot fulfill their mandate, can't keep the lights on, can't run ports, can't run that. I'm saying that got underway well ahead of this final death knell which has been rung by President Ramaphosa.
Well, I would disagree with you about Eskom. The Eskom performance was improving under President Zuma.
And the debacle around Medupi and Kusile?
Well, you know that part of the problem with Medupi and what happened there was around wrong decisions that were taken and also the companies that were appointed to build them.
Yeah, Hitachi.
Yes.
Right, which obviously, for those that don't know, Hitachi was 25% owned by the ANC.
Let's acknowledge that those mistakes
were
made.
So what I'm saying is I agree with you that these SOEs have been degraded, right, to the point where they will be an irrelevance in the fullness of time. They won't come back, but we'll have that discussion in a second.
Yeah.
But it wasn't something... Yes, it's been accelerated under the Ramaphosa administration, and I don't even think he can say that without blushing. But it was definitely started in the Zuma
era. But it also happened during the time that Ramaphosa was the chair of the war chamber dealing with Eskom.
But I'm saying for us
and part of the responsibility that has to be taken for some of the decisions that have been made has to rest firmly and fairly with Cyril Ramaphosa.
Well,
but at the same time, you cannot deny...
I think you can say the whole lot, I think is a fair way to say it.
You cannot deny that people like the CEO of Eskom under Brian Molefe was addressing some of the serious problems of the long evergreen contracts that certain companies had And he was trying to break those evergreen contracts and introduce the possibility for new entries to come into it. One of those was related to the Guptas, but it suddenly, because it became a challenge, because it became a disruptive factor in this whole situation, elevated to as if that was the main reason for the problems of Eskom, which it was not. It was a propaganda campaign that was being run. Brian Molefe had a clear intention to make sure that the purchasing program of coal from the various companies involved in the production of coal in South Africa would change, and that it would move to the empowerment of Black and African ownership.
Right. And here we sit with load shedding.
And load shedding did not come from Brian Molefe.
Under the evergreen contracts, we had no issues around load shedding. I'm just saying.
No. Brian Molefe stopped load shedding. It is possible to stop load shedding by also changing the nature of the way in which coal was procured. You cannot come and make a direct equation between that program of economic empowerment of South Africans and Africans in contrast to those old evergreen contracts and say that those old evergreen contracts secured for us electricity security. Because, Mike, you also know that there were many other decisions that were taken in the whole lineup that led to this problem, including the fact that when new power stations were supposed to have been built, when maintenance was supposed to have taken place, reports that were presented to the Thabo Mbeki administration, those were not implemented. So there's a long history.
There's a long history.
And we mustn't try to reduce that history to one or two elements in order to be able to argue our own ideological case.
It's hard, though, not to when one has lights on versus lights off. You know what I mean? That's sort of almost self-evident.
But what I'm saying to you, I just want to make this point. What I'm saying to you is it is not a situation that lights off is simply the result of Black empowerment of delivery of the important product of coal. It is possible to have lights on and still doing that transformation.
Okay.
And that is what should have happened.
Yes.
But we failed because we backtracked from that. It didn't suit those who were losing their evergreen contracts to see the situation continuing. Therefore, Brian Molefe had to go, and today they have the disaster that we have. It is a deliberate disaster at Eskom. It is not a disaster that resulted simply from an inevitable situation. This is engineered in order to lead us to the point where we will now have the takeover of private interests in the generation of electricity rather than a state-owned company generating our electricity.
We broadly agree.
Yeah.
The difference being that we are arguing about who was the architects of that engineering, right, or where it started. But we're not going to get.
But we are not going to disagree that a major implementer of that process is now this Ramaphosa administration, where this project is on steroids right now.
Well, yeah. Carl, now, Jacob Zuma is ousted.
Yeah.
He's sent packing to Nkandla to go and spend his days, tending the wildlife and sitting on the stoep and swimming in the pool. You were then in the political wilderness almost for a while. You did an effective job of the MK Veterans Association, Jacob Zuma Foundation. You were at every court case. You were there in camouflage. You then even started your own political party. And then you pop up as the newest, shiniest member of the Economic Freedom Fighters. Tell us about that journey.
That's a somewhat too fast shorthand. First of all, I would disagree with the summary of President Zuma having been sent to the wilderness.
Yes.
There was an intention to send him to the wilderness. But the support that President Zuma has throughout the country are clear. Mm-hmm. He's still one of the most popular politicians in the country. Cannot deny that.
No one can deny that.
And a very effective operator. So let's accept that.
Yes.
Yes, I was also supposedly to be sent to the political wilderness.
You don't go to wildernesses,
but it's not that
you obviously
easy
got a
to
problem with
send me to the wilderness
I know.
because I'm a very, very persistent, tenacious person.
You just keep on popping up, don't you?
And I used my opportunities as spokesperson of the Umkhonto Wesizwe Military Veterans Association very effectively to advance the proposals for a program of radical economic transformation. And Umkhonto Wesizwe Military Veterans Association became a very important organization pushing for that particular model. And that's not a model that comes from nowhere, Mike. It comes from the true economic policy programs that the ANC had over decades. If you go and look at the ANC strategy and tactics documents of the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, it always talks about this issue of radical economic transformation. No. It always talks about the problem of white monopoly capitalism. Right. So what I've always maintained is that I'm not talking something which is alien to the ANC. In fact, I talk the real essence of what the ANC's liberation struggle policy program had been until it got subverted by this transformation into the ANC becoming a sell-out new liberal organization. So that is what I was doing. Yes, then the ANC took offense to what I was doing and criticizing what they, as the leadership of the ANC and specifically Cyril Ramaphosa, was doing. And I protested very strongly. You will remember those pictures of me standing, sometimes like my finger alone, outside NEC meetings saying Ramaphosa must go.
You just needed a pork pie hat.
Well, you can try and make fun of what I was doing. But the protests, sometimes on my own, sometimes with others, were very effective. So effective that at one point, at an NEC meeting that the ANC had at Nazareth, Benjani Chauke, one of Cyril Ramaphosa's sidekicks, bust in 1,000 people from Limpopo and the Free State to come and arrest me. One man against 1,000. And at the end of that day, with that 1,000 shouting and screaming at me, who was on the 8 o'clock news, getting my message across? Who was the one who's remembered for that protest? Me. So, yes, many people tried to make fun of this one man who stood on his soapbox, so they said, and was protesting. It was an effective protest, and no one can deny that. So, because it was effective, also because I put my finger on the sore spot and said, our judiciary have been captured by the Ramaphosa regime and turned into a tool of fighting his political factional battles within the ANC. That our judiciary had been captured to select certain people to be charged, others to be left off the hook. When your name is Izzy Kotwa, whatever the allegations are, when you are Gwedemantash with all the serious allegations against you, nothing happens. But when your name is Carl Niehaus, I was charged for some silly charge about COVID-19 transgression, which even the magistrate in Escort prison eventually shouted at the prosecutor and said, you are wasting my time, get out of here. When your name is Ace Magashule and your name is Jacob Zuma, you are under the spotlight, you get charged. When I said that, the ANC National Disciplinary Committee charged me. They said no, but the NEC of the ANC said the judiciary is not captured. I said, of course the NEC of the ANC will say the judiciary is not captured. You've never heard the capturer acknowledging that it has done so. So I get expelled from the ANC, and this is now in 2022, December 22, a week before the 55th National Conference of the ANC. And interestingly enough, during the procedures of that National Disciplinary Committee, Ralph Nkajima, who was the chair of that committee, forgets, because we were on a virtual Zoom hearing, forgets to push the mute button. He says to the rest of the people who are the disciplinary committee, guys, we better move fast. You know the president wants him to be expelled before the conference. So then I said, Mike, I can hear you. Oh, boop, boop, boop. Off goes the mic. Yeah? So I was subjected to a kangaroo court. So they expel me literally 4 days before the conference. I appeal. When you appeal in terms of the ANC's constitution, you are entitled to keep your membership. You're entitled to participate in the conference until that appeal is heard. I go to the accreditation center to get my accreditation because I was a delegate of my branch. I'm also entitled to be at the national conferences of the ANC because I was a former member of the National Executive Committee of the ANC. They grab me by the arms, they bring in the police, they throw me out of the accreditation center illegally. So I said, okay, let me wait and see what's going to happen at this conference. I watched a repeat of 2017. All the corruption that happened behind bringing Ramaphosa in, all the bribing and the money that was used in 2017 at the 54th National Conference, in 2022, much more, worse. Total takeover of corrupt money, putting Ramaphosa at all and every cost back into power. The day after that happened, I wrote my resignation letter. I said, I withdraw this appeal that I've made. I no longer want to appeal against you expelling me from the ANC. I am now resigning because the ANC has become a dead organization. It can no longer serve the people of this country. The ANC is not part of the solution of South Africa. The ANC is part, in fact, it is the essence, the kernel of the problem of the destruction of our society. You can go and read the letter. It is a matter of public record. I've subsequently, because Lucky Montana, a good comrade of mine, wrote me a letter, an article in the newspaper saying, please don't resign, try to work inside the ANC. I subsequently wrote a long article taking all his arguments and refuting them and telling him, no ways, the ANC is dead. And this brings me to the point of why I started the African Radical Economic Transformation Alliance. ARETA was formed with the intention to continue to pursue the program of radical economic transformation. That's why it's in the name of the organization. But when we started on the 23rd of February 2022, I said one of the critical intentions that we have with ARETA is to work for left progressive unity. We must bring the left progressive parties in South Africa together. EFF, UDM, ATM, Pan-Africanist Congress, Land Party, all of them. We must bring unity because the divisions in our ranks is playing in the hands of our enemies. And during the 10 months that ARETA existed, I met almost on a weekly basis with the leaderships of those parties pleading for unity. I kept on saying, let's unite. You know, I tell this story over and over again. It was about 3 months ago, we had a meeting of all the leaders of the left progressive parties, a round table. And I said, let me ask you one question. Tell me, are any of you around the table against expropriation of land without compensation? They said, no, we're all for it. Are any of you against the nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank? No, we're all for it. Land restitution, we're all for it. The issue around a state bank, we're all for it. I said, but then why are we so many around this table? Because surely we don't disagree with each other on the basis of ideology. So the only conclusion I must come to is it's because of our egos. Because we all want to be presidents. In Afrikaans, daar's 'n mooi gesegde, jy wil koning wees op jou eie miskoek. I said, stop this. We must unite. And when I came out of that meeting, that same night, we had a meeting of the National Working Board, which is what we called our NEC in Areta. And I went there and I said to the members of my National Working Board, after what I said today in that meeting with other leaders, I can't justify the continuation of Areta still as another small factional party dividing the progressive left. I said, I'm giving you guys 2 weeks. Go and investigate and do your research and tell me which is the political party that we should unite with, so that we make the number of left parties less, so that we make sure that the ballot paper is shorter, not longer, so that we remove the confusion that all these little factional parties create for the voter from them. They came back to me after 2 weeks. They said the EFF. I said, great. I already knew that it has to be the EFF because the economic policy program of the EFF and the economic policy program that we had as Areta are the same. So now I was faced, and I know I'm talking a lot, but I want to get there because it comes back to, do you want to ask a question?
I do. In fact, I want to stop you there, Carl.
Okay.
And I want to get this in part 2, where we talk about specifically about the EFF, its political standpoints, its economic policies.
But I also want to talk
yes,
about why I took a very deliberate decision, which shocked many people, not to join the MK party.
that is coming up.
Because remember, as we have done, and it was clear in our conversation
Yes.
up to now, I've got a very strong, historically long relationship with President Zuma. But yet I made a choice that I was deliberately, and it was not by mistake. It was a deliberate decision that I'm joining EFF and not the MK party. I knew that the MK party was going to be formed. President Zuma had briefed me in detail. But we'll come back to it.
We're going to get that, ladies and gentlemen. You can't miss part 2, where we discuss Carl's decision to join the EFF and what that means and what the EFF stands for, which I think sometimes we are not 100% clear with. We're going to be interrogating that. And also his decision not to join the MK party that has been founded under the leadership of Jacob Zuma. So thank you so much for joining us for part 1 of the Carl Niehaus story. Part 2 will follow. If you've enjoyed this, please subscribe to the State of the Nation channel. Carl Niehaus, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to getting more detail on the future.
Thank you.
Because we've discussed the past. So to everybody that joined us today, thank you so much, and we'll see you again in part 2.